Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Business Case for Buying Groups. My name is Alice Walker. I'm the Senior Product and Partner Marketing Manager at LeanData. And at the risk of sounding like an SNL host, we have got a great show for you here today. First, a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording, and that is going to be emailed out to all registered attendees tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. We do have the chat, as I see you guys are already using. That's awesome. Keep it going. We want to see where everyone is from. We've already got one out of the States. Would love to see if we had any more. Any other comments that you want to add, go ahead and throw that in there. Note that there is a separate section for Q&A, not the same as chat, one tab over. Go ahead and add all of your questions in there, and all of those will get answered in the Q&A session. Excellent. Moving on to the agenda. First, we're going to start with a welcome. You have all now been welcomed. Congratulations. We are going to dive into why buying groups, why now, what the approach should be to gain that C-suite buy-in, talking about buying groups and ABM, of course. We're going to get into some key metrics. And finally, we're going to make sure we're addressing all of those questions that will just be pouring into that Q&A section. So with that, let's go ahead and get our panelists up here. We're going to do a little bit of an intro. Everybody say hello. Jon, we'll go ahead and start with you. And then Kerry, finally Evan, bring it home, and we'll dive on in.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
All right. No bios needed.
Oh, you just said say hello.
Say hello and
I'm
give
happy to
a
introduce
short
myself as well, but you
introduction,
should just say hello.
So I'll kick off in terms of backgrounds. Hey, everyone. Evan Liang, CEO and co-founder at LeanData. Really excited about the topic today. LeanData, we oftentimes work with companies around revenue orchestration. And as part of that, we oftentimes, when folks are moving to a new go-to-market motions, we are often one of the first vendors that they actually go talk to. So early on, the company's been around for 10 plus years. We worked with a lot of companies to move towards ABM. We were providing a lot of technology around that. And recently, we have been seeing this huge movement about buying groups. So we have been very fortunate to work with some of the leading companies around buying groups, such as Siemens, Palo Alto Networks, Reltio, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to sharing the learnings we have around why buying groups is really becoming a big thing and what we're seeing in our customer base. So maybe I'll hand it back over to Jon.
Got it. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. So Jon Miller, I call myself these days a marketing technology entrepreneur. I'm probably the best known as the first CMO and co-founder of Marketo. After Marketo, I was the CEO and founder of a company called Engagio, which was an ABM platform, which we merged with Demandbase about 4 years ago. And then about 6 months ago, I left Demandbase to set out on starting to work on my next startup, which will be in the B2B technology space. And I'm exploring how AI will help us to kind of reimagine the way some B2B technology works. I talked a lot about buying groups at Demandbase. We believed at Demandbase it's sort of the third critical object in a platform. We had leads at Marketo, and then tools like Engagio and Demandbase came along and said, hey, now we have accounts. But we always and yet we also need this third thing too. So I think that's what brings me here today.
Okay. And I'll jump in following these two gentlemen who done some really amazing things. I haven't done any. I haven't started any company, but I was an analyst with Sirius Decisions and Forrester for about 8 years. And my friend Terry Flaherty and I, who was in the audience, figured out back in 2016 and 2017 that the lead-based approach to demand gen, revenue production in B2B, it just doesn't work very well. That isn't a revelation to anybody. Everybody knows it doesn't work very well. I think what we saw back then was when organizations do have opportunities that turn into pipeline and revenue, there invariably are more than one individual who's on the website filling out forms. There are a lot of people on that website filling out forms. And that's really the best way to identify where the next set of opportunities and revenue is going to come from. And we built a demand unit waterfall around that concept back then. So this is great fun for me to be having this conversation with these guys.
Excellent. Thank you. So with that, let's dive right in and talk about, why buying groups and why now? All three of you really articulated sort of length of time that you guys have already spent kind of working towards this motion and thinking through buying groups on the larger, in the larger SaaS space. Jon, why don't we start with you? Why do you think we're seeing so much momentum for this idea now, particularly?
Well, I'll first answer just like the why, and to me, it's sort of like the perfect example of Goldilocks and Three Bears, where I think what we learned 8 years ago is that lead-based marketing was kind of too narrow, and obviously marketing. When marketing's talking to leads, but sales is selling accounts, that didn't make sense. It had us focusing on perhaps people who weren't the right, companies. And as I'm sure Kerry will talk more about, it sort of misses buying signals by, a lead-based approach misses buying signals by not monitoring engagement, across the account. And so like the classic example where leads go wrong, is, you've got, one person who comes to your website and they download 10 pieces of content, right? That's going to fire off as an MQL on any system in the world. And yet that person may or may not be a buyer and they may not be a buyer at the right company. And at the same time, if you got like 10 people from the same company and it's a target account, each come to the website anonymously, right? None of them would be flagged as an MQL, but there's clearly something going on. Right. And that's why we started doing ABM, and what I think maybe what we, and that was say 10 years ago. And then maybe what we realized in the last 5 years is that accounts in their own right are too broad, especially if you sell different products, to different buyers, same product to different buyers, different products, same buyers, at a company, because they each go on, each of these different groups go on their same journey. It's particularly, I think, a problem for expansion in existing customers. The classic, account-based journey would say once they've bought one product, that account is now a customer, right? So, what if you have a policy of anytime somebody shows interest of then routing leads from a customer to the CSM? People do that all the time, but you would totally miss out on this is a different person and a different buying group looking at a different product. So as I said, classically, if leads are too narrow and accounts are too broad, then buying groups may just be right. And I think that's why it just makes sense. And that's why I think people are talking about it. Yeah.
Kerry, anything to add as far as the current momentum we're seeing in the market?
Yeah, first of all, amen to everything Jon said. Absolutely, 100%. I think there's just a rapidly growing realization that the lead-based approach doesn't work. But I think one of the key elements of the maturing marketplace is that most B2B organizations now have adopted some sort of, if not ABM, the way my former colleagues would define it, at least a targeted account approach. Most organizations understand they got to get aligned on the accounts that they're going to sell to. And once you do that and you start generating more of your demand from a smaller set of accounts, well, what are the immediate symptoms of whether it's working? One, more leads from the same accounts, fewer leads from other places, and a lot more anonymous traffic from those accounts. And if you cannot notice and take action on whether that's happening, then you're going to miss out on a lot of the value of what you've been producing with your ABM approach. And I think a lot of organizations realize over the last few years, we're just not getting the value that we expected to get and hope to get from this ABM approach. Why is that? And when you look into why is that, a big part of why is that is you're missing all of the signals that would tell you that it's working and point you in the right direction toward the right accounts. So I think that's one of the aspects, plus everything that Jon said.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've started to see that kind of relates to all of these is some larger level organizations. I think Adobe is a great example that are kind of starting to really rally around buying groups. Evan, any thoughts on what's driving that for these larger enterprise orgs?
Yeah, so I'll second what John and Kerry said. As I think this makes this whole ton of sense from a trend perspective. But I think there are two things that are kind of driving the momentum, especially in the large enterprises. One, I would say that there are now companies who are leading the forefront and making this happen. So the idea of buying groups actually has been around, I think, since the kind of the beginning of B2B selling. I mean, if you look at like the CRM, it does have opportunity contact with roles. So it always had the notion of buying groups, but it was really, really hard to make it happen. People are like, that makes sense. Show me someone who's actually done that, and how do I make that happen? And a big part of that problem is there weren't examples of people who've done it. And I do think there are companies now who are leading that forefront. Like I mentioned, it's like a Siemens and Reltio, who Forrester has been highlighting. They're at the forefront leading the way. So there are examples to follow. And secondly, I think from a technology perspective, we've gotten to the stage where we can automate enough things that we can also make it operational. Because in the original instantiation, your sales rep had to put all their leads and all the information into the CRM, and then had to tag it correctly with the opportunity contact with role. As we all know, no offense to sales reps, they're not going to do that, right? It took us about 20 years just to get them to enter some information and move their opportunities along. We're never going to get them to actually do all the data quality stuff. But because of technologies like demand-based, Sixth Sense, and LeanData, we now are getting at the forefront where we've just been able to automate in the last couple of years, where we can make buying groups operationally automated in a reality for some of the larger companies. So I think that's kind of the third piece. I think that's kind of starting to drive that.
Although I'd argue, just if I may, that we're like at the 20-yard line, not the touchdown.
Oh,
and in particular, we may have to get into an argument about this, but like I've personally never been a fan of using the opportunity object and the opportunity contact role to manage buying groups. It's the best thing we have today, right? So don't get me wrong. Like if you want to do it today, it's all we got. But fundamentally, I think it does. It's the wrong object to use in some ways because it requires us to create opportunities before a salesperson thinks about it as what's actually an opportunity. So that's why I think the technology has gotten us closer, but we're not there yet.
Like
Kerry may disagree.
We certainly dealt with that question a lot back at Forrester, and I can hear my buddy Terry Flaherty's ears burning right now. But that would be one of the objections we would get all the time. In fact, we made up a term for it called sacred object syndrome. You can't touch my opportunity object, or I say so. There is a simple, I'll say it's a simple fix, but it's not culturally, it's difficult. So the simple fix is you just have stages for the opportunity that are pre-sale stages, and you ensure that you're not going to mess up any of sales forecasting, and you're not going to put anything into their pipeline that you're not going to change any of that. So that's all doable. The issue is a culture and getting over the heartache that it causes sales organizations and sales ops organizations when somebody wants to touch that sacred object.
Yeah, I would agree. Now, but just there's just a little more on that, just to the extent that there are other technologies that sort of read Salesforce, and if those technologies aren't sophisticated enough to look at the opportunity stage, in terms of which ones to include and which ones not to include, that's where it can still kind of go a little bit wrong.
So room for error.
Yeah. So, but you're right. It's a process and a and I wouldn't want to argue to anybody like that you shouldn't be doing it today, because we want to move forward with buying groups, and it is the best we have today.
Yeah, so I think we do see folks doing like $0 ops and moving it earlier stage. I actually do think there is a way to actually have your cake and eat it too. So coming out of for our size, we came out in executive cab where, John, this exact issue was being raised, where it's just like, hey, look, getting my sales team to touch their opportunities it's a huge change for them. And I would say that we are looking at ways that we can allow you to actually have that seamless journey. It's probably involving custom objects that are sitting on top of it, but I think there is a way from a technical perspective that we can make this happen. But I think taking those first steps going forward in terms of managing better opportunities is the necessary first step, I think, for most people to go on that journey.
Just want to throw a little controversy earlier into the thing, just to kind of keep things spicy.
You know, people come here for the hot takes, all right? If they want just the facts, they'll read an ebook. If they want the hot takes, they'll join the webinar, right? What would you say are the people? And when I say people, I mean the specific roles or the position levels that you guys are seeing really pushing for that buying group transformation in the organization. We've spoken to the pain. We know that this is not an easy thing to do. It requires a lot of change. Who is that layer at the organization that's typically that change maker?
So, I'll jump in and say it depends on the size of the organization. So smaller organizations, it's probably the most senior marketing person. As you get into larger organizations, it's the person who is at the kind of senior director level of demand gen, ABM. I see it a lot from people who have ABM or something like it in their titles, because for me, they're the ones who are recognizing that they're getting screwed. Their existing processes are preventing, like they're pouring tons and tons of things into this hourglass. It's got a tiny, tiny hole in the bottom. And no matter what they put into the top, one grain of sand comes out at a time. And they're realizing that they've got to have a way around.
Yeah. So I generally thinking, I think we see a lot of folks like Kerry said, it's at the director level. They're doing pilot projects. They're pushing initiatives forward. But ultimately, you do need the buy-in of like the CMO and then the CRO in order to make this happen. And I think that raises a big part of kind of pushing buying groups is justifying the ROI. And I know that Terry over at Forrester has kind of put together a model around how do you justify this ROI. It definitely starts with sales conversion rates. It's just intuitive sense. If you have more people a part of your buying group, you're going to have higher conversion rates. But it goes beyond that about uncovering new opportunities or hidden opportunities that you may have missed because, like as Jon said, leads are a little bit too narrow and accounts are too broad. So I think it's a combination of those where you can justify those ROI and get more buy-in from both the sales and marketing leader.
It's really interesting that you guys are both seeing that the primary driver for this is coming from the marketing side of the house. Not sales ops, without even getting into rev ops, that's interesting to note.
Yeah.
I was a little bit surprised by that as well, Jon. I think what we generally hear from sales is they feel like this is so obvious. It's like, duh, I thought we were already doing that in some respects. So it's people where they're actually feeling, like Kerry said, that pain point of like, hey, I want to be doing more and I can't. So that's why I think it's coming from there. But I do think the whole organization should be embracing it.
I used to do this thing with, especially if I could get both sales and marketing folks in the room at the same time, where, I ask marketers, okay, so what happens if you get 2 or 3 leads at the same time from one of your target accounts? What happens next? And, Jon, that 10 in 1 or 1 for 10 example. And when marketers say, okay, we don't do anything, we don't notice when we have multiple leads, my response jokingly is, okay, well, don't tell sales that that's happening right now. Go fix it and then tell them that it's always been this way. But the problem is that sales is actually a big part of the problem here. Sales, for instance, is the one who generally imposes rules in an organization that say, if you send me 1 lead from an account, do not ever send me another lead from that account. I don't want you getting credit for it. I don't want a BDR getting paid again. I don't want, none of that marketing. Your job is done. Get out of here. And that is one of the primary obstacles we've had to get over. Is sales just, you need to back away and understand that if we find 2 or 3 or 4 other people who are engaging from that account, that's a really, really good sign. That's not marketing interfering with your deal. That's a really good sign. So I think there's issues on both sides.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I think you hit upon one of the areas, which is the SDR compensation and what role SDRs play in this. And that seems to be something that I think is important to align with if you are moving to buying groups. Because like you said, do they get paid for multiple meetings, and how do you manage that? So that is one of those areas that's interesting to dive in on.
I wonder if that's related to the fact that a lot of organizations do a bad job of SDRs for their current customers, and like finding the cross sell and the expansion opportunities. Usually SDRs are a net new business thing. And yet, as I alluded to earlier, I think the most powerful place for buying groups in an org, is often how do you actually build a machine around your expansion motion?
I've got a couple of stats that I think are really relevant to this. So a couple of surveys that we've done recently. One is of marketers asking them how they identify buyers. The other one was of BDRs just asking them about their jobs. And so one really, really encouraging stat we heard from marketers was that I think 74% overall of marketers say that today they do recognize when they get multiple leads from an account and they do something different. So they prioritize that account differently. So I think that would have been 10 or 20% 5 or 6 years ago. So that's great. That's part of the answer. When you do that, though, if your BDRs are not able to accept and work multiple leads and work an opportunity, you're still going to lose some ground. But what we've seen there is that even for BDRs that are following up on inbound leads, they're multi-threading more than half the time now. So BDRs following up on inbound leads are following up on that lead, but also finding at least a couple of other contacts to go after. So if you have leads, those are the ideal other contacts to go after. But even if you don't, I've been saying, folks, for years, look, the only reason to follow up on a lead is because that account is an account that you think you could be selling something to. And if that's the case, why the hell would you ever call one person and give up, right? That's what you do when you follow up on a lead, so never do that again, right? So when we see those two things coming in line, I think we see two pieces of the puzzle that are really improving and moving toward where we need them to go. Two pieces, not all of them.
And I want to call everyone's attention. We do have an open poll that we'll throw up here just to get a sense of if for those who are attending, the organizations that are selling into buying groups, whether formally or informally. Right now, it looks like we have a lot who are and a lot who are evaluating. And I think that brings us to a really good point as we talk about the organization, as we talk about alignment, as we talk about the structure that you need to really support all of this. How can non-executive stakeholders, right, at the director level, who are often the ones championing for this, effectively communicate the importance of this and the impact of this?
If I may, I'll just jump in and say, one thing is first get your act together and understand what your data looks like today, because your data will look like buying groups. So
yeah, get your data house in order.
Look at your leads data and first understand if a prospect is in market and looking at your solution, do you get, and you can look back at a historical bunch of opportunities to do this math and say, how many leads do we get per opportunity that goes to pipeline or that goes to revenue? It won't be one. It just won't. And then the other thing that you need to do, and everybody needs to do now anyway, is understand who's on your website anonymously. Because when you do, what you will see is the number of people from an account that you like to sell to who are on your website anonymously is at least 5 or 6 or 7x the number of people who are on your website and fill out a form. So in our research we've done with Pat Factory, we see that people who are part of a buying team, 2 out of 10 of those people will fill out a form. If they're actually buying from you, 3 out of 10. Which means 7 or 8 out of 10 are not going to. If you want to know who's on your website and who's going to buy from you, you've got to see those things. So when you see those things and you take those to leadership, it makes an impression. They're not going to say, well, that's stupid, I don't care. Now, the next thing they're going to ask is, okay, well, how do we do that? What's going to happen next? And I'll let John and Evan answer that.
Well, I'm just curious, Kerry, the struggle, I've always been a huge fan of account de-anonymization. Yep. The struggle has always been like, how do you know if these 5 people on your website are part of 1 buying group or 2 buying groups? Yeah. How do you know if they're like, oh, well, this, again, if they're all anonymous and all you can do is anonymize kind of to the account level, yep. You can sort of get some sense based on where they go and what they look at. But that's where I don't think the technology's caught up to be able to sort of aggregate the anonymous first-party intent signals based on interest segments. I'm curious if your research has shown anything around that.
Yeah, so you can, but not in all cases. So one of the problems that still exists is either content that's not differentiated or content that's not tagged. And
Right.
if you're not using AI to read and tag your content, then you're not going to be able to do it. And that was one of the roadblocks I ran into, 4 or 5 years ago, because I thought, oh, okay, we got this all solved. All we have to do is know what anonymous people are looking at on your website and fix. And then I found out, of course, nobody knows what their content's about. But that is what AI is for, as far as I'm concerned, is to figure that out. So that's
no doubt AI can help there. Yeah. And I guess geography, to the extent that you can pinpoint location, that can also help you get some sense of these may or may not be kind of different.
Probably coming from the same place, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think as people move down the funnel, what I've seen for some of the customers that are pioneering this is they start layering on additional signals, right? So they start segmenting their campaign and using campaign member triggers based on what other campaigns, which are non-anonymous to the website. They start matching those up. They start, looking at segmenting it by different product SKUs, different stages and companies. And by doing that, then you can start forming the buying groups, not at necessarily the website level, but that next stage.
Totally. Right? Once you get to known for, opt-in information, you can do a lot more cool stuff. Yep. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And with that, there's a technology piece that's obviously a huge part of this, and something that we've spent some time on the call today. There's also a cultural component to this, and a siloed component to this, right? If you have a large scale organization that has really siloed departments, and I mean siloed both culturally and literally, their data might be siloed and separate from one another. How would you recommend starting to implement such a wide scale change across an organization that has that level of discrepancies between the orgs? Oh, and we've got a bonus poll. We got a question and a poll. Let's go, guys.
If I could just jump in again, because I mean, this can seem like an overwhelming problem, and there are lots and lots of, there's great depth that you can go to. And as I like to joke, I'm the sort of person who would prefer to burn everything down and start over, but that rarely works in practice. So one, if you're a marketer today and you don't know whether you have buying groups that are looking at your content, go look at your leads data and find out. The answer is there. And then when you see that they are, set up some reports and start circulating the reports to the owners of those accounts or the BDRs following up on the leads, so that they can just see and start the process of seeing them in as low-tech a manner as possible. That isn't scalable, but it will start to make the case for understanding that. Same thing goes if you use intent data, then attach the intent data to the leads. Now, there are technologies like ours, like Demandbase and others, that automate those processes and make that a much better experience for the folks following up. But even if you don't have any today, you need to do that. And you need to see those signals together. And those kinds of signals, that kind of technology is pretty ubiquitous today.
Yeah, I've generally seen people do basically try to start, like Kerry said, a small pilot, right? Take a subsegment, like a specific product, specific region, do the pilot, use that to showcase the data, present that data up, and some of the what we've heard from some folks, some of the customers, some of the ROIs that you can extrapolate. Now, Chris, of course, these are small data points that you take big, are enormous, hundreds of millions of dollars in potential ROI that could be uncovered by moving to buying groups. But it all starts with that pilot project, and you may or may not need higher level approval to be able to pull that off.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about marketing trends and expectations, changing gears just slightly, because we could not have this group together without talking a little bit more about ABM. Jon, I want to start with you. What do you think this buying group motion means for the ABM effort?
I mean, I think it's directly ties on what Kerry said, that it's often the ABM team that is sort of, I think, the number one driver for the buying groups, because, everything that people wanted to do with ABM, right, really they want to do with buying groups, and arguably just, ABM was just the easier first baby step into it. So, I mean, without getting into yet another conversation on how ABM is the wrong name for this practice, the reality is, having an intentional focus on who you want to go after and where are they in their journey, and then giving the right appropriate personalized interactions for, and then, measuring, at that level, like that should apply to a buying group framework, as well.
Right.
I'll hold off. I know you have a future question on what are the new metrics, so I'll hold off on my other point I'd make.
We've got a lot on metrics there. Evan, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, so I think it is this evolution. I think buying groups as a framework actually encompasses the stuff that was prior to it. It doesn't have to actually be something that means that you don't have to look at leads or accounts anyway. I mean, one way was we were talking to some folks. I mean, I think of the MQL as a buying group of one. And there may be certain products or segments where just one person is enough for you to have a buying group, right? And so I do think buying groups can encompass both MQLs and the ABM metrics underneath it. It is just broader. It is, as Jon said, Goldilocks is just right. And it allows you to do multiple motions depending on how you're selling and what those buying committees may be.
Excellent. Kerry, anything you want to add to that before we move slightly?
One thing sorry, if I can just layer on.
No, Jon, bringing in with a hot take. I thought you might have a little more.
Well, it's funny because, in some ways, as I said, I'm a technology entrepreneur. You can think like, marketing automation was a set of tools that came about for the lead generation, world, and then ABM platforms came about, to support the account-based world.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean there's going to be, another generation of platforms, to support the buying group based world? And I'm, there's definitely going to be places for LeanData and data vendors, but does the fundamental platform, whether you call it marketing automation or whatever, the platform that exists, is that going to have to, to evolve to support buying groups? And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, where we're not totally there on the technology yet.
Yeah.
Kerry.
I'd love to talk about that a little bit, because I think everybody needs to understand a couple of things about. Well, first of all, let's talk about intent data for a minute. So intent data is pretty ubiquitous. It's also ubiquitously misunderstood. And so I wrote this thing a couple of years ago called signal substitution syndrome. We love our little short names, but intent data has been looked at as so we had our leads, we had our MQLs, and they all kind of suck. So what about intent data? Maybe that can substitute for those things and be a better way to send our sales reps after something. It's not. It never was. And what intent data is great early warning system for which accounts might be in market. And most importantly, it is a buying group signal. It is never a signal of what one individual at a company is doing. It is a buying group signal. Likewise, the people on your website anonymously, we don't care if there's one person from an account on your website anonymously. Nobody cares. We care if there's multiples. And if there's multiples, that's a buying group signal, right? And so when you take the anonymous traffic, when you take the intent signal and you take the people who are on your website that are known together, that is a signal that we care about. That is a signal that is a known signal. And that we're doing today. That is what happens in the way, for instance, that we score an account or we score multiple solutions that you might have inside your account, is by bringing all of that signal together. And if you've got multiple solutions, then we would have, say, multiple models that look at those things differently. So we're doing that today. Now, the technology to get it, if we want to get it onto an opportunity or some other object where what I think we need that we don't have today is some persistence of that signal through to the time a deal is closed. And that we definitely do not have today. Because what I want to know as a marketer or as a leader is, what's the relationship between all of that signal we saw 6 or 9 months ago and whether I'm going to get an opportunity out of this thing. And when we get to metrics, I'm sure we can talk more about that. But that's very difficult, if not impossible today, to figure out.
Yeah. Well, and as a way to... Oh, go ahead.
My take quickly on that is I actually do think buying groups is really, I do agree with Jon. The technology, we're still in only inning 3 of maybe 9, right? And there's still evolution from a technology perspective. There are gaps that we have to fill. But in some respects, I think a lot of reasons why bigger companies are moving to buying groups is because I don't think they're getting full utilization or realization of value from the existing technology they have invested in. Let's just go to the more core, CRM. right? Like how many people love their Salesforce and are really actually leveraging it to their full advantage. And I do think with the advent of technology, with buying groups, you are really actually truly taking advantage of your CRM in a way that was promised but hasn't really been delivered. So I don't know if it's like we need yet another platform. It's more that we have to make all the other investments work better and actually deliver kind of us to that promised land.
Yeah.
So,
So
I guess ultimately I would argue in the same way that marketing automation wasn't sufficient to support ABM, the marketing automation platforms today won't be sufficient to support buying groups either.
So with that, how do you think organizations should think about buying groups if they have truly entrenched metrics around demand generation and ABM efforts and all of the things that everyone has been trying so hard to really, get up and running over the last decade? Is it just an integration between them, taking those exact things and kind of folding buying groups into it? Is it a siloed beta test? Is it something in the middle ground? Because we've got a lot of people, I'm sure even on this call, who have
Kerry,
a lot of campaigns.
Kerry, I'm trying to remember, did I see you write something once about how you hate the idea of the double funnel?
Yes, you did.
Maybe before I go say, maybe the answer here is double funnel. Maybe you should speak first.
Yeah, so I absolutely did. Because I think there are, let me just say this, there are circumstances, as Evan said, where the buyer in B2B is one or two people and you can have a lead-based system and that's fine. But for anybody else, and that's the majority of B2B, and certainly the people who will be paying attention to this, their buyer is a much bigger group and their deals are much longer. And I don't want any of them thinking it's okay to have a lead-based funnel for that. Right? If their buyer is a group of 4 or more, I just don't want anybody thinking that's okay going forward, because it isn't. There's so much better. There's such better ways to look at who's in market and identifying and going after them. I just don't want anybody to think it's okay. So that's why I wrote that piece and why I still, why I would still hold that. I don't want anybody doing that.
So you don't think like it can be used partly as sort of the transition, that Alice is talking about, where it's just like, hey, I've got this lead-based framework today, and I'm going to have that sit alongside my buying group-based framework just to help get out of the entrenched world?
Well, I think it naturally is. I think it's just going to happen that way anyway, because again, people are not going to burn it all down and start over the way I'd like. So people are going to have their lead-based funnels, but immediately what I want people to do is start looking at other metrics. Another of my Forrester buddies a couple of years ago, right before I left, we did a presentation called "Marketing Sourced Attribution is Your Pathway to Irrelevance." And I've never heard anybody that I've said that to disagree. like, of course it is, because it paints such a terrible picture of what you're contributing as a marketer, right? You're producing multiple leads in any deal that's going to close, almost certainly, and then all of these other signals. So there are many things that you can start to look at right now while you still have to report these things that your board or that your senior leadership is requiring you to report, that they understand. Now you can start to look at what is the lift if we do get multiple leads in an account. Like, okay, here I'm reporting on my funnel the same way I already have, but now I want you to take a look at what happens when I get multiple leads in an account. If I engage multiple individuals, even those who don't become MQLs, what's our conversion rate then on an opportunity? How much more likely are we to get one? How much more likely is that to convert to the pipeline? And there are a number of other statistics, so we can go through that. And I know you have a lot to say on that one, John, too.
I was just trying to answer the original question. Like, how do we sort of migrate? And, the best thing I have seen is you run them side by side for a while. The one trick that I will say I've seen companies run into is, are they exclusive? I.e., if you have an account where somebody has MQL'd, because that's in your own system, is that account now not able to, what I've been an account and, what I would call MQA or be a marketing qualified account, or do you sort of let like then both potentially happen. And then that has interesting implications for your metrics. Because like, well, sure, we didn't hit our MQL goal this quarter, but look how many MQAs we did, vice versa.
Yeah.
I don't know the right answer, but you just pointing it out, people do get wrapped around the axle on this stuff.
They do. And so there's a couple of things, like in the natural progression with our customers, virtually everybody's got an MQL-based process in place. We're not going to blow it up and start over. So what happens first, like the crawl phase of this is generally always, okay, but now we have a lot more information about the account. We know whether that account is in market. We have all of these other signals. So BDRs, in order to prioritize these MQLs that you're working now, we want you to look first at the account scores and understand whether they're in market. With that, you get a natural experiment. And the experiment is they're not going to do what you ask most of the time. They're still going to follow up on the MQLs where they like the guy's name or they like the company name or whatever, and they'll follow up on some of the ones where they're in market. And you can see how those two sets perform. And that's one of the ways that, we look at the success of what we're doing is, all right, well, do the ones where we said they were in market perform better than the other ones? The answer is virtually always yes. So the next step is, okay, so now let's not have that be a voluntary act. Now let's say we're going to prioritize all of our leads based on the account information, not the lead information. And now you're really following up on an account. And by the way, we're going to multi-thread into all of these. So I think that's the pathway that I think practically moves you from a lead-based system to a more buying group-based system, is bringing those signals along and using them first to inform the follow-up and then to drive it.
Yeah. And then as a follow-up, I think one of the reasons to also run them side by side, and that's what I'm seeing in most of our customers, is also you don't want to be too dogmatic about saying we got to move to a whole new set of metrics. For example, we have customers who go across segments like commercial and enterprise, and forcing everyone to say, hey, a buying group has to be 3 or more can lead to problems because your commercial segment or your SMB segment may act very, very differently. And so I do think it's not just by company, but it could be within companies. You need to run different metrics depending on who you're going after. And that's why I was saying, like a buying group of 1, a company could be selling to buying groups of 1, buying groups of 10, all within, depending on product line and depending on who their ICP and who they're going after.
They can. So, I just want to really strongly discourage anybody who's got a buying group of more than 3 from thinking it's okay to have a lead-based process.
And that I agree with.
So with that, we're getting a little bit into the metrics, into the way that MQLs are kind of inextricably tied here. What would you say is the right way to actually measure and specifically incentivize buying groups?
So one, you've got to measure the extent to which you're engaging them, and to me, it actually everything has to start with, are you aligned on the right set of accounts? Because nobody cares if you're attracting buying groups from a set of accounts that you can't sell to, and that would be just another vanity metric for marketing that we don't need to go down there. So one, you got to be aligned on the set of accounts, and then marketing's job is to, I think, one, never miss a deal in those accounts. So understand whether there are any deals happening in those accounts and get in front of them and engage people from those accounts, and then start measuring the level of engagement that you get from those accounts and the difference that the level of engagement makes. So if I get 3 individuals engaged, what's our likelihood of getting an opportunity and a deal? If I get 5, if I get 7, if I'm selling a big thing, it may be, data from the Path Factory study show that if you're selling to really large organizations, you may get 17 form fills and 96 other anonymous people from that account during the buying cycle coming to your website. So if you only get 5 and 14, does that mean you're not going to have as good a success downstream? That's what marketing has to understand. Like, that's marketing's job, is to engage that buying team and convince that buying team that this is the right brand and the right solution prior to the time they make a decision. And that decision happens before they talk to sellers.
Yeah. So what we've seen is number of people on the buying group and how helping drive increasing. How do you the delta and additional ads to the buying groups is really, really key. The other one really interesting is if you do have a ideal set of buying groups, it's what's missing. right? So let's say you want to have 10 folks on it and you only have on average 5. Who are the 5? Are they the same persona? And handing that to marketing and being like, hey, marketing, go after these. That's a piece of like technology or a metric that is useful because that actually increases the likelihood of sales conversion.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that's also really aligned with sales, right? You're saying sales, hey, we got people, but we didn't get necessarily the right people. Let's go get them for you. How best do we do that?
Yeah, I call that metric coverage. The other one I've always been really excited about, is sort of the modern version of the demand waterfall, which I think Kerry knows something about. But just like we have MQLs and MQ SQLs and all that kind of stuff in a lead-based world. I used to talk about having MQAs and that kind of thing in an account-based world. Ultimately, I just so similarly, I think we want to start thinking about for each buying group in our enterprise. So let's say you sell 5 products. Maybe you're just going to know, okay, I have 5 buying groups in each of my enterprises. Step 1 is the coverage you just talked about. Step 2 is where is each buying group in its journey.
Mm-hmm.
And you can define your journey stages, any way you want, but usually it's going to be something like they're cold, they're aware, they're in market, they're, actually an opportunity or, whatever, something like that. And the key, like the state of the art today is doing that at the account level, as we said earlier, but how can we start doing that at a buying group level where each buying group has its own stage and, maybe it's through opportunity stages. And then what you can start doing is tracking movement, right? Because fundamentally, more than anything else, for the accounts that I care about, or be precise, for the buying groups at the accounts that I care about, how many of those buying groups moved from cold to aware?
Right.
That starts being some really important metrics. I'll finish with, I decided I did not like the name MQBG as sort of the new thing. I didn't think it was going to catch on. So I've been pushing just QBGs or qualified buying groups as kind of the new holy grail for what we're all going after. And can marketing generate and can sales engage with the QBGs?
I wonder if that's going to be early QBGs where it was folk music or later where it was disco. That's my question.
We love a good acronym.
I hope the later stuff just would be more fun.
Well, we had the Beatles before we got on the call today.
That's true.
Yeah. Evan, any final thoughts? And just a quick call out, we are going to be moving into the Q&A for the final portion of this. So if there are any other questions you want to get addressed, please go ahead and add them into the Q&A section.
No, I think this has been a great discussion. I think, as we can see, I think the 3 or 4 of us could be sitting here talking for a long time. And as Jon said, we are kind of in the early innings. And so I think for the folks who are on this call and on this journey, it is part of a conversation. And I think a couple of the things we want to make sure is I do love the thing around, hey, Goldilocks. I think that's like ABM really, to Jon, I think Jon was one of the credits there was like fishing with nets versus fishing with spears. I do think we need that similar analogy here for buying groups, and Goldilocks, I think, is one that I think makes a ton of sense, where it's leads are too narrow, accounts are too broad, and buying groups are just right. I do think that could be a call on mantra, and I do think this whole thing around metrics is key, and I do think this is where the technology does need to evolve, so it has just to be you have to be opportunity centric or you have to be lead centric. I think we can bridge that gap from a technical perspective, and so I think this is the start of a great conversation, and really excited to have this momentum in this group going after that. So
awesome. All right. Well, with that, I think let's spend a little bit of time on some of the questions that have come in. We have the first is, how do you model buying groups for quarterly planning? Do you still build your targeting models on MQLs? The MQL rears its head again.
So please, no. Your targeting models based on MQLs are, in most cases, just slightly to the north of fiction. They're made up. that have very little relationship to what's going to happen. But if you start from here are the set of accounts from which we expect to generate deals, and then how many solutions, how many offerings do you have? If you have one, that's easy. If you have two, then what are the set of accounts and the set of offerings? And now what you're modeling is how many opportunities do I expect or want to be able to produce from that set of accounts? And so when we built the demand unit waterfall, the B2B revenue waterfall, that was all based on opportunities. And that's where buying group and the opportunity come together, is that the buying group represents that opportunity. It's the opportunity that you're really trying to attract and engage, that you're trying to create and then move through. So it's really looking at how many opportunities you want to develop. And then you can look back again in your own data and see, what does the lead data look like? What does the anonymous traffic data look like historically for organizations where we got opportunities that went to pipeline, and start doing the modeling there. So you don't have to give up anything. There's plenty of data and you can make it out for real things.
And then I think I'll just call out, I think Terry, who's also definitely an expert in here. I had to put in the chat his answer sort of to the whole metrics question around doing a transitional model from MQL to, I guess he's calling it MQL group over time.
MQL group. Okay. I know we're in Q&A, but if I just wanted to point, if I could throw something out, which is, I've long been sort of preaching against trying to credit opportunities as marketing sourced or sales sourced or SDR sourced, because to me it's a team-based effort, and just like trying to have an MQL is false, it was always going to be false. I think trying to attribute credit is always going to be false. I think if we can move to a team-based set of goals, that will also aid the adoption of buying groups. Because it means we're sort of all working together to kind of achieve what we're trying to achieve.
Right.
100% agreed. And I know when Kerry mentioned that about marketing sourced, I chuckled because John and I both built attribution products in our past. So it's not like we're coming from a place of not understanding attribution. We definitely have the perils of that. And I agree. You should be focused. Ultimately, it's about total pipeline.
We have the next one here says, Evan mentioned some customers working effectively with buying groups today. Can we get some more detail about how they're doing that and how they're using LeanData to do that?
Yeah, so obviously, like I said, we have had some early customers, many of whom that Forrester has highlighted in their reports, like Siemens, Palo Alto Networks, Relty are examples. And what they're really doing is they're leveraging LeanData. As I said, our core is we're really good at workflow and automation. And so they're helping them move from a lead-based models through accounts to opportunities. And by working in opportunities, there are a lot of limitations in your CRM, and our technology provides automations to help you do that in a more in a more seamless fashion. It's not perfect, right? It's not dedicated. There's still holes and gaps, and people are along the journey. But using automation, you can allow, for example, something simpler as auto-converting all leads into contacts, adding contacts onto accounts, and maybe even adding opportunity contact with roles automatically, not requiring your salesperson to do that. That's all stuff that technically we have been able to help customers with, and so you're moving on the journey. I'm not saying they're at the finish line. No one's kind of got it perfect, but this is how people are getting from those transitions from a lead-based approach more to an opportunity or buying group approach. But everyone's still on that journey.
Excellent. All right. And then the last question I have here is, and I can tell this is going to be a spicy one. Would you say a pilot works well for setting up new metrics for measurement? It's skirting the double funnel. It's in that same zone.
I think you have to pilot anything that's going to make a big change that you expect to do something. So 100%.
You're rarely going to get any industry expert who's going to say a pilot's a bad idea.
All right. Beautiful. Let's see. One final question that came up. It says 100% on buying group acting as a team. Does each team need a champion?
Does each team have one? Is that the question? Like each buying team, do they have a champion?
You were saying that it should be a team sport for buying groups, right? Like
Ah,
not marketing, not sales, it's a team. But does there need to be essentially a buying groups champion within those team captains, I guess, to belabor the analogy?
probably works best if there is at least one.
At least one. Okay.
I think ultimately, if you can get CROs, it's a very popular title. I don't know if many of them are more chief sales VPs of sales than CROs, but a true CRO, I think, should be able to look across it because it's, as John mentioned, buying groups is both about a new and upsell. So a true CRO, I think, would be the ultimate champion. The question is, is the person who has that title necessarily seeing that whole big purview in my mind?
Excellent. Okay, a few more. I'm going to see how many we're going to do rapid fire here to see if we can get through a few more before our very end. If the thesis is that marketing shouldn't be held to a sourced pipeline metric, but is still expected to generate pipeline, their quotes, not mine, is the proposal that the new metric is a buying group engagement metric within our target accounts wherein pipeline doesn't currently exist. Oh, that's a mouthful. E.g., X% engagement of buying groups as measured by that particular tool.
I think that's an and, not an or.
Yeah.
Like yes, measure engagement and movement of buying groups towards pipeline, and yes, measure pipeline created. My point is measure the total pipeline created. Not try to say, well, this was marketing created and this was sales created, because that's a false journey.
Yeah, and I think we just ultimately want to look at what is all of the activity that is being put against a set of accounts and the buying groups, and what does that activity cause? Right. So, do we get more engagement when we do things? And if we get more engagement, does that lead to better results? Whether that opportunity was first noticed by through third-party intent or first noticed through somebody on our website, it's going to always be very difficult to identify the first moment where a potential opportunity came to life. What I can say is it most certainly is not the person who filled out the form on your website. Like if you want to know one thing that isn't the source of any opportunity, it's a person filling out a form on your website. There were 20 other people from that account on your website before they sent that poor soul to fill out the form. Mm-hmm. So it isn't that. Whatever it isn't that.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We are right at time here. I want to thank everyone who joined us here today, and of course our wonderful panelists for the lively discussion. As a reminder, you'll have the on-demand version of this session tomorrow in your inbox. Thank you all so much for attending. Have a great day. Oh, the QR code. No, I'm sorry. Please scan this QR code and download the authoritative guide to buying groups, our ebook. It's wonderful. There's a lot of information in there. Go ahead and scan the QR code and then look for the on-demand webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Two different things to do there. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.